So, Ashley, tell me, from the media, I just heard that there was this, at least to me, interesting thought, crazy thought, that slavery was a choice.
Oh no!
I thought that it'll be your reaction, but tell me more or fill me in because I'm not that much into hip hop or whatever it is.
So it was a hip hop artist.
Yeah.
It was actually one of my former favorite artists. His name is Kanye West, and Kanye West back in the day was the kind of guy who would speak up for the black community and would point out things.
But this is completely...
Yeah, he very famously, during Hurricane Katrina, announced that George Bush didn't care about black people. And now, I don't really know what's going on with him, but he declared on, I think it was TMZ, that slavery was a choice. He said that people were slaves for 400 years, and he was like, 400 years? That sounds like a choice to me.
And what did he go to school at all? Or because if you study history, and I'm a European, so I was not brought up in this context and did not go to school here. But even in Europe, we know that there were uprisings, slave uprisings, and they continued to rebel and were really brutally suppressed. So the thing that makes this, for me anyway, really sad, or sadder than it could be just to begin with, is that this is a person whose mom was a professor in, I think, either African or African-American studies. She participated in the sit-ins during the Civil Rights Movement. So he grew up with this information of sort of Black American history as part of his family. And his first album was The College Dropout, so he's been to school, he's been to some college, but even if he hadn't, that idea is so bonkers and insulting for multiple reasons. First of all, as you said, there were many times where people revolted against slavery. There are many uprisings, some successful, a lot brutally suppressed. There were people who, when they were kidnapped from Africa and taken through the Middle Passage to the United States, jumped off the boat to not become slaves. And it's just, like, to say that people chose slavery is like the ultimate in victim blaming. It ignores all of the times where people actively fought against it, and it ignores the reality of who had power, how that power played out. I remember reading somewhere, which I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but they were taking people from different places and communities. People didn't speak the same language. People were separated from their families. People were traumatized. People were being beaten. People were being raped. Lynched.
People were being lynched. Like, what were you going to do? And it's, who would choose that?
Is it possible, I'm thinking, that he is just that kind of an short-circuit shocker, that he likes popularity or public attention so much that he would say almost anything to get it, or that's kind of how it feels?
He's sort of. He's the kind of guy who, he likes to talk about how he's got his free thought and he's speaking his mind. And he says things that are kind of out there and outlandish, and most of the time it's things that are kind of funny or that you don't take seriously. This is some of the worst things that anyone can say that he said. But I think there's two problems of this. One is that he's taken a community. I mean, technically he should have offended everyone, but there are people who actively work against people of color, actively working against Black Americans, who are using this and taking it and running with it. And so there are people who are really...
Well, there might be even a source, because I know that this was one of the arguments
for slavery,
Yeah.
that people are choosing it, or we are taking care of them, or we are feeding them, while otherwise they'll die of hunger, and all these other crazy arguments. And
Right.
that goes back to the very beginning of modern slavery.
Yeah, the idea that, we fed them and we gave them housing and you stole them and you paid for them. You can't.
And miserable housing.
Yeah,
and,
you threw them and you gave them the worst food, you gave them the worst housing, you beat them, you assault them, you took them from their countries. Like
exploited.
Exactly. Everything about this is awful. So the one thing that's really, really bad about this is that the community that built Kanye up and who builds hip hop up is the black community, and a lot of people are confused and they're hurt and they're feeling betrayed. The other problem is, as I was saying before, this is being used to promote this false history,
Falsehood, yeah.
and people are capitalizing on it and trying to play into that thing of, slavery wasn't that bad, or it was a choice, or people of color and black people especially don't have problems anymore because this wasn't as big as we say it is. And people listen to him because he's a huge star. And it feels silly to have he's a hip hop guy, he's not a historian, why would anybody listen to him? Tons of people are listening to him. He endorsed Trump, and Trump's poll numbers went up because of that.
And
he has a huge influence.
That brings to me back kind of my more classical education also, that popularity, the word for popularity is synonymous in Latin with vulgarity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that here we see that looking or seeking this popular appeal or something like that very often leads to that very low vulgarity, or it's slightly different, but it is coming from the same group of words. One is being with populace, with people, and vulgar means being with the common people.
Yeah.
But unfortunately it can lead into really dangerous situations. I would like to go with this a little even further down. That whole thought of 400 years and not rebelling, which is not true, but I think that is another dangerous American myth, where we think that if we are successful, like he clearly is, and popular or something like that, that we think that all of it is because we are so good. And that's the myth of especially American capitalism.
Yeah.
And then blaming those who are poor or who were suppressed because, if they had 400 years, I would do it differently. Just look at me, how successful I am, or something like that. But that's not only him, that's throughout our society, and it drives me crazy. They don't recognize that sometimes it is just pure chance that they are in right time with the right knowledge in the right place, and they start Microsoft, or Apple or something like that. And then these guys thankfully are not blaming, they are helping those poor people. But very often you come across wealthy Americans who are saying, I made myself, I pulled myself by bootstraps. Why they don't do that? That's their fault.
Well, there's the whole issue of the prosperity gospel movement.
Where just don't get me started.
If you believe strongly enough and you are faithful enough and you tithe in the right way to the right people, then God will bless you with riches. And that's antithetical to the gospel and ridiculous.
And with that goes really always or almost always blaming of the victims.
There's so much blaming of victims going on. And it always frustrates me, and it has frustrated me as a student of history and as a proud black person, how often that gets put onto us. Even looking at the Bible and what the Bible has said about slavery. The Bible was used to justify slavery, as it was also used by the slaves as part of their uprising and part of keeping their spirits ahead. But Scripture is used to condemn poor people. Scripture got used to say slaves should obey your master. Literally a quote. And completely, thankfully,
African American community knew better and draw strength from those marvelous passages about Exodus.
Yes.
Returning, so that's one thing, and that would be probably the slavery similar more to what we have in modern American history of that slavery. You have slavery in Hellenistic times, and that'll be completely different kind of kettle of fish. It'll probably ask for another lecture or something like that.
Yeah.
That cannot be compared.
No.
You know, first of all, I disagree even with that in New Testament, in pseudo-Pauline letters which are ascribed to Paul, and Paul most likely did not write. You know, there is one letter which he writes accompanying a returned slave, but he works as an advocate for that slave and is actually asking for his release. But that's the legal way doing it. But it's really complicated. But one thing is that you cannot compare Hellenistic slavery, or definitely not Hellenistic domestic slavery, with what happened in early modern times in Americas. And Caribbean and South America are even worse. You know, because that was just a killing fields. And horrendous. So,
and in thinking about this, I think about the theologian who just passed last week, Dr. James Cone, who was a professor of mine, who created Black liberation theology. And you were saying, like, using that Exodus text as something uplifting to Black people to look at what we have gone through and how the people in Egypt, the slaves in Egypt, were able to find some kind of freedom, to be able to travel through the wilderness and deal with hardship and go through unfamiliar territory, and they survived.
That was inspiration for me under communism.
Exactly. Like, there's something so beautiful and inspirational about reading that, and there's something so beautiful and inspirational for me in looking back and forget this slavery was a choice thing. No, it wasn't. But the fact that my ancestors made it out, that we managed to stay alive for hundreds of years under this deeply oppressive, life-threatening regime against us, and all of those people who fought so hard to stay alive and to deal with this, they kept going from generation to generation to the point where I can exist today. That's beautiful and a miracle, and shows the strength of people. And that strength, those people who are that strong, do not insult them by saying that they chose that. Do not criticize them, because that is not true. Celebrate them.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Yeah, that was what really sustained us. We were tapping this African American strength and rebellion in our much less oppressive situation, and that was inspiration.
Yeah. So
or swing low,
sweet chariot,
and so on. I know it by heart, mostly in Czech translation, but it just don't provoke that.
So do not, to anyone who was watching, please don't listen to Kanye West about almost anything at this point. But don't let anyone tell you that slavery is a choice or do anything to uplift slavery or suffering of others, but instead take inspiration from the perseverance of God's people, who even at the darkest hour were still able to make it through, to inspire people in different lands, to have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren to the point where we are alive today. Take inspiration from that.
Amen to that. Thank you.
Thank you.